Many nations adopt the economy is like an egg farm metrics, which, as explained in the video link below, align economic success with population growth. And as a result, their governments apply confirmation bias, leading to belief in imaginary benefits and an exaggerated amount of future population growth. The real future growth won't match those projections, which will ease housing and cost of living crises, result in falls in migration and refugees, and provide future generations of all but the billionaires a better future than if population growth was not ending. Welcome to One Finite Planet video on population growth isn't natural, normal, or our future. Perpetual population growth is not natural, normal, or the future, at least not while we remain confined to one finite planet. As explained in 1798 by Thomas Malthus, within any finite space, there's a point beyond which adding more people eventually creates shortages that erode the standard of living. Malthus may have been a polymath, but he was not an omnimath, making it understandable that he, in his book that predated Darwin's Origin of the Species by over 60 years, missed concepts such as accessorized evolution, see below, and the Industrial Revolution, which made his timing pessimistic. But the principle that population growth must eventually lead to scarcities that impact the standard of living, well, in that, he was clearly correct. The big picture is, even without anthropogenic climate change, Earth won't forever remain suitable for us humans, making expansion beyond this planet necessary sooner or later, but up until we reach that stage, any further population increases threaten our standard of living, which is what is causing population growth to end, well, unless you're an economist. While the economic belief system results in denial of the reality population growth is coming to an end, it is, and not just globally, but to all nations. And now for the global picture of what is happening and then why. It is now generally acknowledged by anyone studying population, even within the UN, that world population will peak in coming decades. And there will be population correction, with the only real debate being about at what number and what date the peak will occur. And yet, in many nations that say they accept that global population will soon peak and then decline, and that this is desirable, governments, economists, and the press all declare that population growth ending within their nation would be an economic disaster. A quick overview of human history can make it appear as if for humans population growth is both normal and sustainable. But when you look closer, it becomes clear that recent population growth has been very, very different, and this reveals why continued population growth can't possibly be sustainable despite what some farm owners want everyone to believe. Firstly, looking at recent population growth, over the past 100 years, the population has doubled from 2 billion to 4 billion in the around 50 years from 1922 to 1972, and then doubled again in 50 years from 72 to 2023, which, taken alone, sounds like constant growth, but the data reveals the reality that population growth began rapid acceleration in 1920, peaked around 1972, and then began falling again. Rather than constant growth, this 100-year period represents both sides of a spike in population growth, never seen before, without any expectation of ever being seen again. Looking at birth rates reveals, no, the spike was not caused by people having more children, as surprisingly, birth rates were falling the entire time. Population growth resulted from medical advances that over 100 years roughly doubled life expectancy, mostly not because old people live longer, changing what is a full lifetime, but moving over time from over half of all people dying as children to almost all children now surviving, so that almost everyone gets to live a full lifetime. While the rate of population growth over the last 2 decades on this side of that recent peak is similar to growth prior to the population explosion, the current global growth results from, on average, women having around 2 children, as opposed to an average of around 7 children needed for population stability before the dramatic fall in child mortality. which means that while the current rate of population growth may seem like a return to a previous normal, even if that were true, the change from an average 7 births to an average 2 would still represent a very different normal. Life for us humans has changed, and in a very positive way, and fortunately, things aren't going back to how they were unless the medical system collapses. Now, looking at that previous normal, while there was consistent growth over the 6,000 years prior to the population explosion, as explained in content linked below, even that arose as humans spread over the globe and through technology displaced other species. The displacement is a key point here, as the total biosphere of life on Earth has been decreasing for the past 500 million years to half what it was 500 million years ago, with a brief higher peak during the Carboniferous period just over 300 million years ago. This decrease is too slow to matter over time spans of less than 1 million years, but the key point is that since total biosphere is not increasing, a bigger population of one species will always be offset by a reduction in other species. Any increase in our population means a reduction in the population of other species, and looking back, the decline in other species has been quite notable. Our population increase has been enabled by our evolving technology, but has been at the expense of other species. As our technology hasn't stopped evolving towards the entire biosphere, being only us, our food and our pets, but as that's a limit, the closer we get, the greater the impact. I suggest, while increasing from 2 to 4 and 4 to 8 squeezed out some other species, going further starts to make our own lives less appealing, and growing our population beyond what's appealing isn't actually how nature works for complex species like us. Population momentum is the term describing how changing the population growth trend is like changing the speed of an enormous ship. There is a long delay between turning off the engines and the ship coming to a halt, and even shifting into a reverse won't stop the ship from continuing forward for some time. As examples, the USA and Australia have had birth rates well below replacement rate for decades and currently at 1.62 and 1.64, yet births still exceed deaths by around 500,000 and 100,000 respectively in 2024. This is because births were to parents born to the population born around 20 to 40 years ago, while deaths were on average from the smaller population born on average 80 years ago. During the decades between birth rates falling below replacement, 1972 in the USA, and an end to natural population growth, the population ages as the numbers reaching average life expectancy increases. In time, every country with a births per woman below replacement level will experience natural decline in population until some decades after something causes another change to birth rates. I've come across a variety of theories on what changes birth rates, ranging from what I label as the Taliban hypothesis, which is that educated women have less babies, which would be a disaster for any country with child mortality rate of Afghanistan, through to theories such as people beginning to watch TV or contraceptives. The common thread of these is what I label coincidence hypothesis, which is that human birth rates are not affected by population changes, and that birth rates happen to fall as child mortality decreased is just a fortunate coincidence. The problem with these coincidence hypotheses is that they originated in the 70s when it was seen as essential for birth rates to fall further, and people were looking for ways to associate falling birth rates with what they wanted to get other people to do. A lot of things somewhat correlate with recent falls in birth rates, but few popular proposed links correlate even for the entire 20th century. Also, it might make people stop doing those things you wanted once birth rates fall. Contrary to what many assume, as shown here, in the early 20th century, birth rates were already falling below levels of previous centuries, and the trend throughout the population explosion was for lower birth rates. It was medical advances reducing child mortality which more than offset the falling birth rates that created population growth, because an increasing percentage of births resulted in people who'd go on to become adults. The correlation between falling child mortality and birth rates is far stronger and over a longer period than for education or any one other factor. Having studied birth rates for over a decade, there are far more complete explanations in content linked below, but the only theory I have found that actually matches all available data, including the child mortality correlation and the remarkable level of population stability over all human history, is that humans, like all other advanced species, adjust birth rates to produce children in numbers that ensure the best life for those children. This results in a species able to recover population levels after natural disasters, but avoids excess population growth without requiring excess deaths to avoid scarcity in periods between the disasters. This could be called the children get priority proposal, which, unlike coincidence hypotheses, has not been making predictions constantly in error that can't explain the data. However, it doesn't give answers politicians favour. Children get priority predicts birth rates will adjust to child survival rates, and predicts birth rates falling whenever population reaches a level where further population increase would risk scarcities with the reduced living standards, and predicts birth rates rising when new opportunities emerge. The biggest recent change in birth rates is that all around the world, the number of children per woman for population stability has fallen from 7 before 1800 to now 2.1 in any society with full access to modern medicine. But birth rates in most nations, including all developed nations, during the 20th century fell to levels below the 2.1 needed for population stability, which will lead to population reduction. For why, consider the data from the website Per Square Mile, which calculates more than 4 Earths would be required to support global population with living standards of the US, but only 1/3 of 1 Earth to support everyone having the living standard of Bangladesh. Back in 1922, the global population of 2 billion could provide for the entire planet to live to the living standards of those reached in the USA 90 years later in 2012, had the population remained static. But population and living standards both rose. By 1972, within the US, there was already enough people for the now higher living standard to allow scarcity to restrict gains in further living standards, resulting in the population breaks being applied in the USA and other advanced countries. This means birth rates had to adjust to not only passing optimum population, but also correct for the reduction of child mortality that meant far fewer children for any given population growth rate. As countries cross a living standard threshold that makes further improvements more resource constrained, birth rates fall below replacement level. The per square mile data focuses on sustainability and dates back to 2012, so exact correlation is not expected, but the general principle seems to apply. Envisage a world where not just some of the working class have become middle class, as happened by the mid-20th century, but robots have become the new working class, and all humans can be the asset-owning upper class. That world's our possible future, and it will be easier and more likely if we can slowly bring numbers back below 8 billion. It's clear the simplistic "the more offspring the better" is not adopted by species in nature because it can result in children that in Darwinian terminology are less fit to survive. The children get priority does describe what is seen in nature for other species, and in species we evolved from, a variety of biological responses change birth rates, ranging from a reduction in ovulation and sperm counts, changes to sex drive, through to kangaroos that stall pregnancies, and species where individuals change gender to manipulate birth rates. But how can children get priority work in humans where there's the added complexity of number of children being not just instinct, but also conscious choice? The spectre of climate change, a world with increased species extinctions and ever-increasing population facing a housing shortage, and the scenario of generations living in ever smaller homes, can seem more like a dystopia than a future world that's going to be great for children. While most conventional demographers assume parents don't consider how life will be for the children, my observation is that we humans tend to care a lot, and wanting the best for one's children is part of being human. Searching generations poorer than their parents will reveal that many feel right now we're failing to deliver the best for our children, and too little is being done to address it. In many societies, there is talk of affordable housing for essential workers. Essential workers are not expected to be able to afford normal housing? How can parents, facing a world where it seems children may not be able to afford housing, bring numbers of children into the world that would exacerbate the problem? It can feel like right now, even having 2 children makes it uncertain both children will have a home of their own. On this basis, until there's an end in sight to housing prices rising faster than incomes, expect birth rates to continue to move towards 1.0, which is below half the replacement rate, and in extreme cases, even lower. Of course, given time, these low birth rates will fix the housing crisis, and birth rates can then rise. $1 houses in some locations highlight how it's already becoming fixed in some areas, and this effect is starting to spread. The implication is that those wanting to increase population for the economy are actually not only reducing morale amongst young people by overestimating future population, they are also keeping birth rates unnecessarily low. Some fear we're headed for disastrous population collapse, but nothing in what is happening would lead to catastrophic population collapse any more than previous birth rates would have continued until catastrophic overpopulation. Yes, the end of growth, or even people realising population growth is ending, could be catastrophic to the prospect of even more trillions in valuation of companies with a stock price inflated by visions of future population growth, but that I feel goes even beyond being just a first world problem. As for any real problems, for a reminder on how birth rates adjust, consider this look at how, not long ago, during peak population growth, the fear was overpopulation, while the 1968 book The Population Bomb may have been correct in predicting that without a fall in birth rates, the population, by now in 2025, would be too large for the Earth to feed. It completely failed to understand that birth rates adapt, and birth rates would fall almost exactly in line with what the book suggested, with nature targeting what was suggested would provide the best future for children. It didn't take people dying from starvation for birth rates to reduce. All it took was the prospect of an erosion of living standards, which begins long before disaster and mass starvation. Consider how the most desirable foods, my example would be lobster, become the domain of only the wealthy, long before it is only the wealthy that can afford enough food to survive. The goal of nature is not population growth until all of a species are on the brink of starvation, but the lower number, which represents optimum population, as outlined in content linked below. Just as in 1968, the author of The Population Bomb warned of an overpopulation crisis on the assumption birth rates would continue as they were, those in 2025, predicting an underpopulation crisis, again assume birth rates will continue until it results in disaster, and are missing that birth rates adjust to circumstances. A look at total history makes it very clear that no one single fixed birth rate would have both ensured the human population could grow to recover after disasters, but still avoid growth to unsustainable levels between disasters. While it would seem unlikely birth rates will grow in the midst of a housing crisis, we're still biologically the same species that was able to grow the population even when most children died before becoming adults and more than double the number of children were needed to achieve population growth. We just need to wait until conditions for population growth return. However, thinking consistent with the egg farm metaphor allows governments and farm owners to see it as an economic disaster if the population even stops growing, regardless of there being a point when growth would make life worse for the chickens. While farm owners do still have to live in a world of scarcity, sufficient wealth can provide abundance even when the majority of people are experiencing a decline in living standards. The global population will peak by around 2055, and the further future global living standards rise, the longer population will then continue to fall, perhaps eventually to as low as 2 billion, even without mass disaster. Well, that's if the promised AI future of abundance materialises and is to be made real by being combined with an abundance of nature. When the global population trend will impact nations planning on continuing population growth through immigration is covered in the Part 3 video in this series, linked below, on national egg farm thinking.